Have you ever stood in front of a mirror and looked away? Not because you didn't have time, not because the light wasn't right, but because somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "Don't look too close. You might not like what you see." That quiet avoidance, that subtle turning away, it tells a truth that words rarely admit. Many women are still waiting to be seen, not just by a man, but by their own eyes. We spend years learning how to be lovable, how to walk, talk, smile, how to give just enough without asking for too much. We study their silence like scripture, trying to decode affection from absence. And still, so many of us lie in bed wondering, why do I feel invisible? Not just unwanted, but unseen, like a soul whispering in the dark, hoping someone hears. Louise once said, "You've been criticizing yourself for years and it hasn't worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens." But what happens when that approval feels like a foreign language? When everything inside you has been taught to seek validation through someone else's eyes? The truth is, you've been trying to earn a love that was never meant to be transactional. You've been offering your light in hopes of being chosen, as if worth could be proven by how much you give, as if your softness, your loyalty, your patience could one day be enough for someone who never truly looked into you. But there's a deeper longing beneath the effort, a sacred, quiet desire to be seen for your essence, not your sacrifices, to be chosen without audition, to be held without first having to shrink. And yet the world keeps praising the woman who never asks for too much, who loves silently, forgives endlessly, and waits beautifully. So you learn to become the good girl, the giver, the one who says, "I'm fine," while a storm screams inside. But at what cost? How many pieces of yourself did you trade for glimpses of love that never stayed? Clarissa Pinkola Estes said, "A woman must go into the forest of her own soul to reclaim her bones." And isn't that what you've been avoiding? That sacred return to the self, the one who remembers who she was before she thought she had to earn love? The mirror doesn't lie. It waits. It waits for the moment you finally stop looking for yourself in someone else's eyes and come home. Not to perfection, not to performance, but to presence. Raw, alive, unfiltered. This is the invisible power women overlook. The quiet radiance that men feel before a word is spoken. The soul that no longer tries to be chosen, because she has chosen herself. And yet, that's only the beginning. Now let's talk about what happens when the heart keeps whispering. Maybe if I just give a little more, he'll finally see me. He sees it before you say a single word. That quiet energy. That way you hold yourself, not out of pride, but out of presence. There's something magnetic about a woman who is at peace with herself, not because she's figured everything out, but because she no longer feels the need to perform. Men sense this, often without knowing why. It's not your lipstick or your laughter. It's not your curves or your kindness. It's something far more subtle, the way you take up space without apology, the way your soul feels unhurried. There's an invisible language every woman speaks, even in silence. When she walks into a room, she doesn't announce herself, but everything shifts. Not because she's loud, but because she's whole. It's the kind of presence that doesn't beg for attention, because it's too busy being rooted. This is the feminine essence, not to be confused with what society sells as femininity. It's not about being delicate or agreeable. It's about being real. It's the energy of someone who's no longer outsourcing her value to someone else's reaction, who no longer waits for a man's eyes to tell her if she's enough. But most women aren't taught this kind of beauty. Instead, we're told to be desirable, which often means being smaller, softer, more convenient. We twist ourselves into shapes that feel foreign, hoping someone will call it love. And in that effort, we forget something sacred. We forget that true attraction isn't something you create. It's something you allow. It's not built on strategy, but on surrender. A woman who is anchored in herself sends out a signal, not of perfection, but of presence. And that signal, that's what he feels, before you even say hello. Yet the world rarely tells us this. It tells us to be pretty, not powerful, to be wanted, not witnessed, to be appealing, not authentic. So we try to become desirable, not realizing that in doing so, we sometimes step further and further away from our truth. But what if the real magnetism isn't in how we're seen, but in how deeply we've chosen to see ourselves? Now let's speak about what happens when that deep desire to be seen turns into a quiet desperation, the kind that hides beneath every smile, every silence, every subtle, "maybe he will stay this time." There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from the aching hope of finally being chosen. It's not always loud. Sometimes it looks like a woman who always says yes, who always shows up, who always gives just a little more, even when she's running on empty, and the world applauds her for it, calls her strong, devoted, selfless. But inside there's a quiet plea. Will this be enough for someone to stay? This is the quiet desperation to be chosen. A hunger not for romance, but for recognition. The kind of longing that begins when a woman learns that being loved means being useful, that to deserve affection, she must prove herself, again and again, and it's not her fault. Somewhere in her story, she was taught that love is conditional, that worth is something earned through perfection, not presence. So she becomes everything, the caretaker, the comfort, the constant. She reads between texts, forgives without apology, and stays even when her heart begs her to leave. Not because she doesn't know her value, but because somewhere inside, a voice still whispers, "If I do everything right, he'll finally see me." But love doesn't grow from effort alone. It grows from truth. Louise Hay reminds us, "I am worthy of love simply because I exist. Not because you fix him. Not because you sacrifice. Not because you waited patiently for him to realize. Simply because you breathe, because your heart beats, because you are." And yet, for so many women, that feels radical. To be loved without proving, to be seen without performing, it feels unfamiliar, because their hearts have been trained to earn, not to receive, to negotiate affection rather than inhabit it. And what happens when you spend your life trying to be chosen? You start forgetting that you already belong, to yourself, to life, to love in its purest form. You forget that being picked is not the same as being cherished, that being needed is not the same as being honored. But the truth always finds a way. Even in the silence, even in the longing, your soul remembers. And when the giving becomes too much, when the loneliness behind the smile grows heavier, a deeper question begins to rise. What if my effort isn't love, but a mask I wear to hide my own emptiness? And that's where we go next. There's a certain ache that comes from giving too much, a kind of invisible sorrow that hides beneath every generous gesture. It doesn't look like pain at first. It looks like love, like kindness, like being there no matter what. But over time, it begins to wear on the soul. Because what looks like selflessness on the outside can sometimes be self-abandonment on the inside. There are women who give not just their time, but their essence, who pour their heart into people who only ever take small sips. And they do it hoping to be needed, to be kept, to be loved in return. Not out of weakness, but out of a deep-seated fear. If I stop giving, will anyone stay? And that fear has roots. It often comes from a place far back, a childhood moment, a past relationship, a silent belief. I am valuable only when I am useful. So she gives. She overextends. She says yes when everything in her body says no. Not because she doesn't know boundaries, but because she's afraid of what happens when she finally draws one. But here's the quiet truth. Love that is bought through sacrifice is not love. It's a transaction. And over time, it empties the heart. Because no matter how much you give, it will never be enough for someone who doesn't truly see you. And perhaps the saddest part is that many women know this. They feel it, but they keep giving anyway. Because stopping feels like failure. Because slowing down feels like being forgotten. Because choosing themselves feels selfish. Louise Hay reminds us that our outer world is a reflection of our inner world. And if your inner world has been shaped by unworthiness, your relationships will mirror that, not to punish you, but to awaken you. The overgiving, the silent waiting, the endless forgiving. They aren't signs of love. They're signs of a heart that hasn't been taught to receive. And the woman who gives everything often does so because she doesn't believe she's enough on her own. But what if that's the great lie? What if your value has nothing to do with what you offer, and everything to do with who you are? What if the love you've been chasing is actually found in the space where you stop trying to earn it? And that leads us to a deeper realization. That real connection doesn't come from doing more. It comes from being more honest, more whole, more you. Which brings us to a truth often overlooked. He doesn't fall for your effort. He falls for your essence. It's a quiet paradox. The more effort you make to be loved, the more invisible you often become. He doesn't fall for the way you remember his favorite meal, or how you wait up just to hear how his day went. He doesn't fall for the emotional labor you carry like a silent prayer. He may appreciate it, he may even rely on it, but it isn't what stirs his soul. What touches him, deeply, unforgettably, is your essence. Not your doing, but your being. There's something profoundly magnetic about a woman who is rooted in her truth. She doesn't try to manage perceptions or mold herself to someone's expectations. She simply is. And that presence, that soul-level congruence, it's what makes a man stop in his tracks, because energy doesn't lie. You can smile and agree and love him fiercely, but if you're not at home within yourself, he feels it. He might not name it, but he'll sense the absence, the disconnect between what you give and who you truly are. And this is where so many women lose themselves. In the pursuit of love, they leave their essence behind. They become performers in their own lives, kind, generous, and exhausted. And in doing so, they dim the very light that once made them unforgettable. But when a woman begins to inhabit her soul, when she stops explaining, proving, and pleasing, something shifts. She no longer waits to be chosen. She chooses. She no longer asks, "What do I need to do for him to stay?" But instead wonders, "What do I need to honor myself?" And that shift, that quiet inner return, is what men feel. It's not the perfume, or the dress, or the carefully crafted text. It's the resonance of truth. It's the way her presence says, "I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to be me." Louise Hay taught that everything we give out comes back. And when we give from a place of depletion, the return is often more of the same. But when we begin to live from our center, not for applause, but for alignment, we invite love that doesn't ask us to shrink. Real connection doesn't arise from sacrifice. It emerges from soul, and the woman who dares to be fully herself, unapologetic, unpolished, and real, is the one who becomes unforgettable. But many women hesitate to show that full self, not because they don't want to, but because somewhere along the way, they were told they were too much. And that is what we need to explore next. There's a wound many women carry in silence, the wound of feeling too much, too emotional, too intense, too sensitive, too deep. And so, little by little, she starts to shrink. She laughs softer, loves quieter, speaks less. She trades depth for digestibility, fearing that if she brings her full self, she'll scare love away. But that shrinking doesn't protect the heart. It isolates it. The woman who was once vibrant, expressive, intuitive, becomes cautious, guarded, not because she wants to be distant, but because she's learned that her truth makes others uncomfortable, that her emotional honesty is labeled as neediness, her passion mistaken for drama, her vulnerability for weakness. And so she begins to question her own nature. She starts believing that something is wrong with her intensity, that she must dilute herself to be loved, that she must quiet the fire in order to be held. But what if the fire wasn't the problem? What if the world simply never taught her how to hold it with reverence? Your feelings are not too much. Your heart is not too open. Your longing is not a flaw. It is a gift, a sacred sensitivity that, when nurtured with boundaries and self-trust, becomes your most magnetic quality. Because here's the truth. What many women call being too much is often just unchanneled power. It's not the feeling that hurts. It's the lack of space to express it. It's the fear of rejection that teaches repression. And that repression doesn't make you easier to love. It makes you invisible. Louise Hay spoke of self-acceptance as a healing balm. I accept myself unconditionally right now. Imagine if that became your prayer. Not, make me smaller, but make me safe in my fullness. Not, help me be less, but teach me how to stay with myself, even when others don't. Because when you stop fighting your nature, you begin to flow. And when you flow, you attract from a different place, a place of peace, not performance. Being too much is only a problem in a world that asks women to be less. But your essence, your real, rich, tender, wild essence, is exactly what makes you unforgettable. And here's the deeper secret. The parts of you you've been hiding, they are the very parts he's drawn to. Not because they're easy, but because they're real. Let's talk about that next. Let's talk about the mystery you've been taught to conceal, and the soul who's waiting to be revealed. There's a quiet beauty in what you've tried to hide, the soft ache in your voice when you speak about the past, the way your eyes linger a little longer when something moves you, the dreams you've buried under years of duty, and the words you never said because you didn't want to be too much. These hidden places, the parts of you no one fully sees, hold the very mystery that draws him in, not the mystery of confusion or emotional games, but the sacred mystery of depth, the kind that whispers, "There's more to me, if you have the soul to see." We've been taught to package ourselves, to be digestible, approachable, clear-cut. But real women aren't puzzles with instructions. They're rivers, forests, firelight. They are layered, intuitive, ever-changing, and it is that very unpredictability, that quiet knowing, that presence, that stirs something in a man's spirit. But if you've spent years hiding your depth, softening your truth, dimming your wisdom, denying your softness, then you've also silenced the magnetism that makes your presence unforgettable. Louise Hay reminds us, "My inner world creates my outer world." So when your inner world is filled with shame, fear, and self-doubt, your outer world begins to reflect those shadows. But when you begin to reclaim your hidden parts, not by explaining them, but by embodying them, the world responds. Not everyone will understand your mystery. Some will try to label it, control it, even reject it. But those aren't your people. The right one, the real one, won't need to analyze your depth. He'll feel it. He'll lean in, not away. He'll listen, not judge. The feminine mystery isn't about withholding. It's about embodying. It's the art of being rooted while still allowing yourself to feel, of showing your wounds not as weaknesses, but as sacred maps of where you've been. And that is what he feels. That's what he remembers. But for him to feel that, you must feel it first. You must walk into your own inner forest and reclaim the parts of you were told to silence. The poet, the healer, the dreamer, the wild one, the soft one, the woman you buried to be accepted. Because when you meet yourself in those places, you begin to radiate something no makeup, no outfit, no performance can replicate. And yet, so many women still search for that recognition outside of themselves, still look to be seen, before daring to see themselves. Which brings us to something sacred, something that shifts everything, the mirror, and what happens when a woman finally dares to look. It seems like such a simple act, to look in the mirror. But for many women, it's one of the hardest things to do, not just to check their reflection, but to truly see themselves, to hold their own gaze without flinching, to stand still in front of the truth of their own eyes and say, "I am here, I am worthy, I am enough." Louise Hay spoke often of mirror work, not as a beauty routine, but as a spiritual ritual, a moment where you come face to face with the only approval you've ever truly needed, your own. She would say, "Look into your own eyes and say, 'I love you. I really, really love you.'" And at first, it might feel awkward. It might even bring tears. But those tears, they are not weakness. They are release. Because for years you've begged others to see you, to reflect back the worth you couldn't find on your own. But the reflection you avoided is the very one you demanded from lovers, friends, even strangers. And when they didn't offer it, you questioned your value, not realizing that the mirror wasn't out there. It was always within. A woman who dares to see herself becomes visible to the world in a different way, not because she changes how she looks, but because she no longer hides. She stops performing for love and begins to embody it. She no longer waits to be chosen, because she has chosen herself, and men feel that. They may not always have the language for it, but they recognize the shift. There's a gravity to a woman who sees herself, a quiet authority, a calm that says, "I'm not asking you to validate me. I already know who I am." This is not arrogance. It is not hardness. It is clarity. And clarity is magnetic. You don't need to be louder to be heard. You don't need to be prettier to be loved. You don't need to be softer to be accepted. You only need to be aligned with your own truth. And that begins when you return to the mirror, not to fix, but to witness, not to criticize, but to honor. Because when you finally see yourself, you stop needing to be seen. But not everyone will understand this self-assurance. Some may even misinterpret it, which brings us to another subtle truth, the difference between true confidence and the coldness they think they see. There's something unsettling about a woman who doesn't beg, not because she's harsh, not because she's closed, but because she no longer waits for someone to tell her who she is. And that kind of confidence can be misunderstood. Some may call her distant. Others might say she's hard to reach. But what they're really feeling is her boundary. Not a wall, but a sacred line that says, I love you, and I love myself enough not to disappear for you. It's a quiet kind of power, the kind that doesn't shout but doesn't bend either. And for women who've spent years being everything for everyone, this shift can feel radical, even lonely. Because when you stop over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-giving, the silence that follows can be loud, but it's in that silence that something beautiful happens. You begin to hear yourself again. The truth is, confidence and coldness are not the same. One is rooted in self-trust, the other in fear. And a woman who's rooted, grounded, centered in herself, she doesn't need to prove her warmth. She just lives it, with discernment, because she's learned the difference between connection and attachment, between intimacy and enmeshment, between loving someone and abandoning herself in the process. Louise Hay taught that boundaries are a form of self-love. Saying no is sacred. Choosing yourself is not rejection of the other. It's remembrance of the self. The feminine doesn't lose her softness when she becomes strong. She simply learns how to hold it with integrity. And yes, this might confuse some, especially those who only knew you as the giver, the fixer, the one who always made room for their chaos. But this version of you, the one with clarity, with limits, with a sense of her own soul, is the one who finally feels safe inside her own skin. And men, they feel it too. Some will walk away, not because you were too much, but because they couldn't control what they couldn't define. Others will draw closer, not out of need, but out of respect, out of resonance. Because there's something magnetic about a woman who doesn't flinch in her truth. A woman who no longer tries to explain herself, who simply is. And that brings us to a story, a moment, a woman who discovered that the love she was searching for arrived only when she stopped trying to be understood. She spent most of her life trying to be clear, clear in her words, clear in her emotions, clear in her love. She believed that if she just explained herself enough, her heart, her history, her hopes, someone would finally understand her, and in that understanding, she would be loved. So she explained. She softened her truth. She painted over her pain with polite language. She made herself easier to receive, easier to digest. But instead of bringing her closer to love, it made her feel even further away. Because the more she tried to be understood, the more invisible she became. Until one day, she stopped, not out of bitterness, not out of resentment, but out of a quiet exhaustion. She had reached the edge of her effort, and in that moment, something shifted. She stopped explaining. She stopped convincing. She stopped translating her soul for people who didn't have the ears to hear it. And that silence, it wasn't empty. It was full, full of presence, full of truth, full of self. She began to do things differently, not louder, but deeper. Not to be seen, but to feel herself again. She moved from proving to embodying, from pleasing to being. And as she did, something beautiful unfolded. She became magnetic, not because she changed, but because she returned. To the woman who didn't apologize for her feelings, to the girl who used to dance without worrying who was watching, to the soul who didn't perform, but simply existed in her own radiance. And that's when love showed up. Not the kind that rushes in with promises and disappears with excuses, but the kind that sees, that stays, that resonates. Because when she stopped trying to be understood, she was finally felt. Louise Hay always said, "I am in the process of becoming my own best friend." And that process, it's not about isolation, it's about integration, about remembering that you were never too much. You were simply giving your fullness to people who preferred fragments. And now she no longer begs to be chosen, because she understands that the heart who truly sees her will never ask her to explain. Now let's close this journey gently, with the truth of what he sees. When you finally see yourself, there's a moment when everything softens, not because someone chose you, not because a text finally came, but because you looked in the mirror and saw yourself, fully, lovingly, without asking for permission. And something in you whispered, this is what I was waiting for. He sees it too. Not your beauty, not your accomplishments, not your ability to hold his pain. He sees what happens when a woman is no longer performing her worth, but living it. Louise Hay once said, "I am in the process of becoming my own best friend." And that process, it changes everything. Because when you are your own companion, you stop being afraid of your own silence. You stop rushing to fill the emptiness with someone else's presence. You stop offering pieces of yourself in exchange for being kept. Instead, You begin to move differently. You speak slower. You breathe deeper. You listen, not to be polite, but to connect. And you no longer chase being chosen, because you realize you are the one who gets to choose. Clarissa Pinkola Estes wrote, "A woman who sees herself as whole never offers herself in halves." And that's the truth. The woman who has come home to herself does not beg. She does not plead. She does not wait at the door of someone else's love, hoping for scraps. She is the home. She is the presence. She is the garden that blooms not for approval, but because it is her nature to flourish. But here's the most beautiful part. When you no longer try to earn love, you attract something deeper, not attention, not desire, but resonance. The kind of love that doesn't need explanation, because it sees the soul before the surface. And that love is the only kind worth staying for. So before you ask, why doesn't he love me? Ask instead, have I loved myself in a way that shows him how? Before you wait to be seen, dare to see yourself. Before you seek to be held, hold yourself, not with pity, but with reverence. Because men don't fall in love with effort. They fall in love with soul, with depth, with a woman who knows her light and no longer hides it. And your soul is ready to be seen. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and join this growing circle of women, healing, rising, and remembering their worth. And before you go, there's another video waiting for you on the screen. A next step in your journey back to yourself. Click it now, and keep walking toward the woman you've always been.